I found out my fiancée cheated during her bachelorette party, so I'm planning on leaving. Last night, I, 31M, did something I'm not proud of because curiosity got the better of me. I was getting ready for bed when I saw a light pop up on my girlfriend's, 30F, computer. Normally, I'm not one to pry into someone else's privacy, but it was a message from her friends about the party they were at. We were getting married soon, and she was out with her friends at a bachelorette party. I stayed up all night checking her computer and her Facebook messages and discovered she had cheated during the party. By cheating, I don't mean getting a strip tease or something, which I would be okay with. I understand it's a bachelorette party, but she actually gave some dude some sloppy toppy and ended up going home with another guy that night. She has that other guy added on Facebook, but the chat merely consists of, "I had a good time and it was nice to meet you." The conversation dates back to the bachelorette party. I have, however, read the messages between her and her friends. They have a small group, and I found out what she had done there. It all seems as if it was a one-time thing that happened then, but I'm a mess. I haven't slept all night, and she is headed for work in an hour or so when she wakes up. I don't know what to do. We are supposedly getting married in 3 weeks. We were planning on buying a house, having kids, and growing old together. I feel like I want to throw all of that out the window. I am sitting here smelling like booze, feeling drunk and depressed. Honestly, I want to go and kick her out right now, but I don't want to do something irrational. Update 1. I left in the morning to take a smoke. My head was still messed up. I don't think she cheated other than this night. Nothing I found indicated anything else. I guess she wanted this to be her last night before settling down or something. I honestly don't know and don't care. When I was outside taking a smoke, about 15 to 20 minutes after I left, she had woken up. She noticed the drinks out and asked me what I had been up to. Basically, she came to give me a kiss and a hug. I followed through with it but honestly felt empty doing it. I didn't want to give her any hint of what I knew. She asked me why I had been drinking and why I didn't come to sleep last night, and I told her I was just having some nightmares but everything was fine. I felt detached, like I was watching myself in the third person through a TV or something. She asked me if any stress was related to the marriage and the plans. I just told her something along the lines of, "I love you. How can you be stressed about the best thing in your life?" After that, she got herself ready and left for work. So, it was time to take action. I basically started packing my most important things and I called and canceled the venue where we were supposed to have the wedding. Apparently, they took 15% of the money for canceling early because we were having such a big event. I told them it's fine, and I really don't care at this point. I also saved screenshots of everything and have taken them with me. Around 1 p.m., I called a taxi and went to stay at a hotel far away from my city. I didn't leave any notes or pictures at home, I just left. I needed the alone time in the hotel to think everything through and process what had happened. Around 3:30 p.m., my phone started getting spammed with calls from my ex-fiancée. I got calls and messages from her sister, her friends, her parents, my parents, and a few of our mutual friends. The only people I called back were my mom and dad. I have huge trust in my parents. I basically spilled the beans and told them a nicer version of what had happened. I asked my dad not to say anything and also asked my mother not to say anything. I told them it's ended, it's over, and that I won't be getting married anymore. I also told them not to tell anyone about what I told them. I didn't tell them exactly what happened, just that I found out she wasn't being loyal to me. I didn't think giving details would help in any way. Around 5 p.m., my dad called me back and told me my ex-fiancée is completely hysterical and is basically broken down. Completely not understanding what is going on, I just told my dad not to intervene and that I needed some alone time right now. I basically shut my phone down and have been staying silent ever since. Her sister knew about what happened at the bachelorette party, and I have the text to prove it. She even laughed about it and told her not to feel guilty because it's a bachelorette party, and that women should go all in on this night. I really feel like Neo in the Matrix, dodging bullets in slow motion. However, instead of dodging bullets, I have dodged an unfaithful wife, endless fights, and a ton of depression. I honestly feel a lot better knowing my life will get better. Unfortunately, she has broken down and is begging me to take her back, as is her sister and her friends. Update 2. Yesterday, my phone was being spammed by many family members from her side and friends. I had this gut feeling she was going to come up with an excuse of some sort. I picked up the phone, and the first thing I heard was a torn voice. I could hear she had been crying all day and was in a messed up state. She kept begging me to come back, that there was an explanation for everything, and that she loved me. She said I had misunderstood the entire situation. I told her to explain it to me right then and there. She said because I had only seen a small part of the conversation, it had all been misunderstood, that I should come back home, that she loved me, and that I had taken an irrational decision to leave. During the entire conversation, I was just giving really short, empty answers in a cold manner. After she told me it was all a misunderstanding, I told her to call me back in 10 minutes and to check Messenger. After I hung up, I sent her the entire conversation with a ton of screenshots. Not all of them, but most of the important ones. It didn't take 2 minutes for her to call back, crying hysterically, saying sorry for everything, that she wanted to unalive rather than lose me. She said she was forced by her friends and her sister to have fun one last time, and that she needed to let all the energy out before stepping into a marriage for life. I stayed silent. The more I didn't talk and just said okay, the more she cried. She started telling me I could sleep with other women if I wanted to get back at her, or that she would tell everyone about what she did so I could take her back. I told her that sleeping with other women was not something I needed because the moment I met her and started loving her, she was the only woman I needed. I didn't need to meet or sleep with someone to know the best thing in my life was waiting at home. She kept begging and begging. So I just told her that if she came clean to her parents and family, I would think about it. After that, she started saying something, but I just hung up. Suddenly, her father called me up and apologized for everything. He and his wife knew what happened now, and he was so sorry for all of this. He told me he understood how I felt and that he didn't raise his daughter that way. His wife basically stole the phone from him and told me her daughter had never been this destroyed before. I politely told her I appreciated her opinion and then said, I have to go, goodbye. My ex-fiancée called me back and begged me again, saying she told her parents and also sent a text message to our mutual friends about what had happened. She kept apologizing on the phone, and I didn't say much. After some time, I just told her not to cry, that she shouldn't be apologizing because single women like herself were allowed to do these things, and I hope she finds Mr. Right. She started crying even harder, and then her sister took the phone. She said, we told everyone what happened, are you going to take her back now? I only said I would think about it. She then tells me her sister was turning into a dangerous situation of wanting to unalive herself because of all of this. The only thing I said after she told me that was, it's a good thing you are close to her so you can make sure she doesn't do that. Maybe take her to a doctor or something. After this, I just hung up. My phone had been blowing up with messages from everyone, and I didn't plan on responding. I honestly feel a lot better right now, like I could move on.
My husband thinks I baby-trapped him despite already being married for 7 whole years, so he ran away last night. My husband, 35M, and I, 32F, have been married for 7 years. We lived next door to each other and just clicked, like a fairy tale. One thing I've always thought made our marriage strong was our friendship and trust in one another, although my husband seems to think otherwise now. Recently, my husband found out that his friend, Jeff, 34M, has been baby-trapped. Basically, Jeff's wife, 32F, stopped taking the pill and fell pregnant a few months into their relationship, only coming clean after the wedding. Jeff, from a very conservative family, felt obligated to marry her after the pregnancy and now feels compelled to stay, regardless of the messed up dynamic, honoring his vow to support his wife and child. For some reason, my husband has been really rattled by this. I'm currently 4 months pregnant with our first child, and my husband asked me yesterday if I was trying to baby-trap him. Initially, I laughed, thinking it was a joke. However, he was absolutely serious and doubled down. I explained that we've been married for 7 years, and having a baby wasn't going to trap him any more than he already is. He didn't like that answer, claiming there's no time limit on baby trapping, and my intentions weren't pure based on how I treated his concerns as a joke. He said he had trusted me in the past, but my reaction gave him no reason to trust me now. I wasn't sure how to respond, so I suggested we talk about it in the morning. Today, I woke up, and my husband was gone. I received a nasty text from his brother, 28M, accusing me of forcing my husband into this pregnancy, despite it being a joint decision. My husband is not responding to calls or texts, and I'm wondering how to move forward. Any advice is appreciated. Update 1. I realized while reading the comments that everyone was right, I wasn't angry enough. My husband had insulted me and our marriage in a very hurtful way, and it just didn't register for a while. I was so confused and upset that it didn't occur to me to be angry, but I think everything just needed to sink in. In the meantime, I called my best friend, 31F, who has been such a rock in my life. She came over with some sweets and was furious when she heard. She called her husband, 34M, to the house after I had gotten everything out of my system. He is a family lawyer and said that he would happily represent me if I wanted to go through with the divorce. This man is a saint and will draw up divorce papers on Monday. My mother-in-law, 66F, showed up with my husband in the car not long after my best friend's husband arrived, and she practically dragged him to the door. She said that he had shown up at theirs late last night, saying that he was certain that I was using the baby to trap him. Fortunately, my mother-in-law is a smart woman and absolutely tore him a new one before dragging him to the house today to apologize. My worm of a husband did not look me in the eye the entire time but said that he was scared about becoming a dad and projected his fears onto me. He said he wasn't sure if he was ready for that kind of commitment, and he ended saying he would step up if he needed to. I called him a coward and told him that he should stay with his parents until I am ready to talk to him. I didn't want to say anything about the divorce papers because I didn't know what his reaction would be, but he will find out soon enough. I also showed my mother-in-law the text from his brother, and her face was like a storm cloud. I don't know what will happen there, but I am sure it will be bad. For now, I am exhausted and just want to curl up and cry. My best friend has said she'll spend the night with me, and we can watch silly movies. I have also made an appointment with a therapist for next week, but for now, I just need to rest. I am exhausted and devastated that my marriage has come crumbling down. Update 2. Overall, everything has settled a little bit. In good news, I had a scan with the doctor, my mother-in-law also attended with me, and the baby is happy and healthy. I finally found out the gender. I'm having a little girl. I am over the moon. My mother-in-law was a gem and was so touched that I had included her in the scan. She is very excited to be a grandma. On that note, she organized a family lunch a couple of days after the scan. I was a little reluctant, but I knew that she had good intentions and wouldn't do anything to make matters worse. When I arrived, my husband and his brother were already there, along with my father-in-law, 70M. It was quite awkward until my mother-in-law asked if anyone had anything to say. My brother-in-law spoke first and apologized for his awful text, saying that he was swept up in the moment and wanted to support his brother. I explained how hurtful it had been to receive such a nasty and vindictive message, and that he knew as well as anyone that my husband and I had been trying for almost a year. He hung his head towards the ground and mumbled something I couldn't fully hear. It was like a weak sorry. That was pretty much the last I heard out of him for the afternoon. Next, my mother-in-law looked quite pointedly at my husband, but he actively avoided anyone's eyes. Eventually, she spoke up and announced that my husband would no longer be welcome to stay in their house. She said that she was ashamed to have her son behave the way that he has, and that she would prefer to make space for her granddaughter rather than have some lowlife hanging around. My husband had opened up his mouth to say something earlier, but his eyes lit up when she said granddaughter. My husband had always wanted a girl, and he was suddenly in tears, saying that he was so pleased to hear the gender. My husband was suddenly wanting to touch my belly and asked if he could come home and paint the nursery. I told him in no uncertain terms that he was not welcome and that he had destroyed any trust I had in him. I told him that if I took him back, I would be worried that he would disappear at any kind of big news and that I couldn't have someone at my side who balked at the first chance. He asked me if I was telling him it was over, and I point-blank told him that I had solicited a lawyer. My husband was kind of frantic, but I felt so calm, like someone had put a blanket over me in the situation. Normally I am super emotional, but I felt so removed from everything. My husband said that this was not fair, that just because he had shown a little bit of panic, I was supposedly throwing away our life together and denying him his daughter. His dad reminded him that this is the same baby he felt trapped by no more than 2 weeks ago. My husband said it was a mistake and he was stressed, but his mom asked him how he thought I felt. She asked him to imagine being so vulnerable and giving up your body to grow a family, and suddenly the one person you trust is accusing you of terrible things. He said it was a mistake and he projected his fears onto me. I told my husband that I felt so broken when he left because I had all these dreams of a beautiful family which came crashing down in an instant. My husband said that he wanted those things with me and he wanted our baby girl, but that he let the panic overwhelm him. I told him that wasn't a good enough excuse for what he put me through, and that he certainly didn't seem panicked when his mom had to drag him to my door to apologize. He didn't have much of an answer other than to say that he was ready now and wanted our girl. In all of this, in all the times he told me he wanted me and our baby, he never once apologized properly. After a very long discussion, the lunch wrapped up, and my mother-in-law stood by what she had said about my husband not being welcome. He asked again if he could come home with me, and I told him that it was my house. I had owned the house before we got married, and it was going to be a safe space for me. That is to say, he was not welcome. As far as I know, he is staying at some hotel. Finally, he was served divorce papers at work on Friday. My best friend's husband drafted them earlier that week, but I wanted to wait until I had thought it all through. I received a few missed calls and crying voicemails asking if I was really throwing away our family, but I did not respond. My mother-in-law called me when she heard, and she supported me in my decision. She said she never wanted my marriage to end this way or for her son to be so callous, but she said she is here for my baby and me, and that we will always be family. She even tried to apologize on my husband's behalf, but I told her that was not necessary. At the end of the day, his actions are his to own. My best friend has been around all weekend, and we went baby clothes shopping for a little bit of sunshine in all of this. She has been such a rock, and her husband has helped so much with the process. I don't know what will happen next, but I feel much calmer and like I am making the right decision. I will update again if anything major or exciting happens, but for now, I just want to get through all of this and hopefully come out with a beautiful baby girl.
Mother-in-law abandons my child, shows up after 25 years and expects to be accepted as a grandmother. When my son was 3 days old, his mother decided she didn't want a child anymore, so I've raised him as a single father since then. She claims she's not ready to have a child and refused to even feed him or hold him. I wanted to give her some time. I thought that maybe it's just postpartum depression. I was ready to be there for her, but she was serious. She packed her stuff and left the hospital. Her last words were that she wants to see neither me or our son ever again, and she kept that promise. I got the feeling that mother-in-law had something to do with it because during her pregnancy she was talking all the time about how young her daughter is and how inappropriate of a moment this is for her to have a child. I think mother-in-law somehow secretly persuaded her to take this step. So I was left alone with an infant in my hands. It definitely wasn't easy. I was just 21 years old, I had to leave college and work very hard to give my son everything he needed. Fortunately, I wasn't completely alone. There were people who helped me to get through the hardest period, people who babysat him while I was working, who gave me advice on how to take care of a baby, and I'll be forever thankful to them. When he grew up a little, it became easier. I could send him to a kindergarten and work without asking people to take care of him while I'm not there. During all this time I hope to hear from his mother. I hope that she'll eventually come around and realize you can't just leave your child like a worthless piece of trash. But, even though I had left her my contacts and she could call me or write me a letter whenever, she didn't. I never heard from her. She never once used her rights to visit him. When he was little, he often asked me why his mother left him, why she didn't want him. And I didn't know what to answer because I always tried not to speak badly of his mother in front of him. Now my son is 25 years old, he's a hardworking, educated young man, and I'm so proud of him, and I'm proud of myself that I was able to raise him to be a good person. We stopped talking about his mother a long time ago. It was his initiative. He was like, well, if she doesn't want to be with us, then it's her loss and there's nothing we can do about it. So recently mother-in-law appeared on our doorstep. Without a call, without any kind of notification, she was just there and she had come to visit her grandson. I couldn't believe my ears, and at first, I almost didn't recognize her. And she was behaving as if she was a caring grandmother who had come to see her grandchild like she does all the time. Not like she was gone for 25 years. When my son saw her, he didn't recognize her either. I have shown him pictures of his mother and his grandmother just in case they show up one day, but I never really thought that they would. She ran up to him and hugged him just like a loving grandmother would, asking how he's doing and how big and beautiful he has become, and he pushed her away and looked kind of confused. I told him that it's his grandmother who randomly showed up to visit him, and he was like, oh, and walked away from her. Mother-in-law didn't take this reaction very well. She looked at me and was like, what have you taught him if he doesn't even say hello to his grandmother? He's looking at me as if I'm a stranger. Haven't you told him about his mother and me or shown him our pictures? Well, technically you are a stranger, mother-in-law. He had never seen you in person, so why are you so surprised? You show up out of thin air after 25 years when he's all grown up and expect him to treat you with love. Isn't it kind of delusional? My son said, Dad did show me your picture, but I needed no picture, I needed you to be there for me. He was quite hateful with her, throwing question after question at her, and mother-in-law's responses were so incredibly narrow-minded, it looked like she wasn't expecting him to ask any questions. He asked her where his mother was, and mother-in-law was like, "Oh, she's doing very well, she's living together with a great man and she has 2 nice kids. She has gotten over that misunderstanding about your birth." She was acting as if her daughter was the victim here. As if we were the ones who left her. He asked her why did his mother abandon him. Mother-in-law said, well, she was such a young girl, it would be crazy for her to have a child at that age. She had her whole life ahead of her and a baby would only be an obstacle. You must understand it, she didn't want to lose her freedom. Honestly, her daughter was older than me when our son was born, she was 24. I don't think it's too early to have a child, it's not like she was 14 or something. Actually, age has nothing to do with it. I could have given up my son too, I was very young as well. But I didn't because I loved him and I wanted to be his father. At this point I wanted to show mother-in-law the door, obviously, she wasn't welcome in our house, but my son stopped me, he had one more question. He asked why mother-in-law didn't want to be his grandmother. His mother left him, fine, but why did mother-in-law leave him too? Mother-in-law said, well, I had no time to take care of you. I was a young woman too, I had my life too. And grandkids are only obligated to take care of grandparents when they're old and that's why I'm here. Then my son told her to leave and never come back, he said he doesn't want to see her ever again and he won't help her with anything. And as she was leaving, she attacked me like that's what I thought, a man alone cannot raise a proper human being. Such a rude and impolite boy, he would have turned out better in an orphanage than with you. So according to mother-in-law, the conclusion is, don't have children while you're young, or if you do, feel free to leave them and then come back a few decades later and they'll love you even though they have never received any kind of care from you. But seriously, what the hell was she expecting? I discovered my wife's affair the day she was admitted into the hospital. Years later she can't accept that I have moved on. If there was ever a prize for the most horrible way to learn of your significant other's affair, I would probably win it and be in its Hall of Fame. My ex and I met in our mid-20s, it was through a mutual friend at a barbecue. At first she seemed almost too good to be true, not only was she incredibly beautiful but she was also shy and introverted. It took a while for us to officially date, but once it happened I was over the moon. When we first tried to get intimate she suddenly started crying. I freaked out and thought it was something I did, but she apologized the next day and told me she was triggered. As it turns out, 2 years before meeting me she was in a long-term relationship with a guy that roped her. She had a flashback but reassured me it had nothing to do with me, so we took things slow as she was still in therapy. It was tough, but because I loved her I believed once we got over this it would make our relationship stronger, and for a while it honestly appeared that way. Fast forward another year and we'd gotten engaged. I was fortunate enough to be able to buy a house for us courtesy of inheritance from my late uncle. Things were going great and I half seriously suggested we plant a peach tree to signify new beginnings and she was all for it. We were wedded not long after that. Of course we had our normal ups and downs like every married couple, but I considered us more lucky because she always made it a point to never go to bed upset with each other. Sometime later life basically happened and I was promoted at my job. It meant more pay but it also meant I would be traveling more for work conferences and business meetings. I noticed my wife had been getting down a lot more and wasn't being as intimate as before. She would keep her phone close to her and even stopped gently addressing things that upset her. I tried to talk to her about it but she assured me that she was fine and this was a phase she was going through, and having no reason to not trust her I let it go. She would sometimes go to her sister's place and spend the night telling me she just needed a bit of girl time with her sister. The day I got that fateful phone call was the day she was meant to be keeping her sister company again. I will never forget the sound of my sister-in-law's voice as she kept saying I'm sorry over and over on the phone while I drove home from a week-long business trip. I was confused and had absolutely no idea what she meant. After I managed to calm her down somewhat, she informed me that my wife was in hospital and that I needed to hurry home. My mind went into overdrive as I tried to get more information as well as not crash while I began speeding to get there faster. The only thing she told me is that it was an assault, then cut the call, and wouldn't answer when I tried to call her again. I remember rushing into the hospital barely breathing and frantically asking about my wife when the world's most understanding and patient police officer sat me down to explain what happened. He told me he was a friend of my sister-in-law and he happened to respond to a domestic disturbance call. He arrived on the scene to find a couple fighting. The supposed boyfriend was on top of the female laying hands on her and she was screaming trying to scratch him. This didn't make any sense to me because 1, this had nothing to do with my wife because we're married, and 2, literally everyone who knew my wife knew she wouldn't do that. He gave me a knowing look and placed his hand on my shoulder, then told me to be very calm because said girlfriend was actually my wife. If it weren't for the severity of the situation I would have laughed in his face, but something in the way he said everything made me believe him. I then was ushered in by a nurse to see my wife, and what greeted me to this day I still can hardly find the words to describe it. I just stood there for what seemed like an eternity, then a doctor came and explained her injuries to me. The jaw was slightly fractured, the left eye was swollen shut and bruising covering half of the face as well as 3 broken ribs. Then the doctor dropped another bomb and told me she was pregnant. I still couldn't understand how this happened. Then I caught sight of her sister. She at first tried to avoid me, but at the persuasion of her police officer friend she told her what she knew. It turns out my wife's ex had gotten in contact with her 5 months ago. He was doing this redemption pyramid step thing where he would apologize to people he has wronged in order to clear his karma. They began talking more, then he convinced her to meet up for coffee and show her he was a changed man. Obviously old feelings resurfaced, coupled with the fact that he appeared changed now. It soon developed into an emotional affair. My wife approached her sister for advice, who told her to take things slow and just get it out of her system if she needed to, which then led to a physical affair 3 months later. She actually told my wife that she should at least make peace with her ex in whatever form it may be, and even offered to cover for my wife once in a while. My sister-in-law was in tears at this point and kept apologizing to me, saying that she didn't know about the abuse as my wife never told anyone other than me and her therapist at the time about it. I was numb, I just couldn't feel anything and was absolutely dumbfounded by my wife's actions. When my wife finally woke up I was there and she burst into tears upon seeing me. I spent the following months in zombie flight mode. There was individual counseling for her as well as marriage counseling for us at the strong urging of her family. In counseling she was surprisingly forthcoming about how it happened and how she absolutely hated herself for causing me pain. She mentioned how, at one point on her way home from his place she actually fantasized about driving into the river because she smelt like him and didn't want his scent to corrupt me. She said she tried to end it but was too weak, and only after learning that she was pregnant that it actually woke her up and made her realize that any further contact with this man was toxic to not only her but the unborn child as well. Hence she went to end things in person for good when he snapped on her. She became a shell of herself and developed a phobia for any other males but me. At one point she couldn't even use the bathroom at night unless I was holding her hand. After the baby was born we got a paternity test and he was mine, but the more time I spent with her the more I realized I didn't hate my wife, I actually loathed her. I couldn't see the woman I married but instead saw his leftovers each time I looked at her. I decided to leave because I was afraid I'd do something I'd regret and be exactly like her abusive ex. She begged me not to leave and even made the ridiculous offer of giving me a hall pass as well as slapping her if I wanted to. I knew at this point I had to get out. She was actually very generous during the divorce. She moved back into her parents and signed a very well thought out co-parenting plan issued by the courts. Moving forward 3 years later, I met my now fiancé by chance. I was in a bookstore with a buddy of mine and we were discussing Egyptian mythology when this beautiful woman approached me to correct me on my pronunciations of the Egyptian gods and cities. Needless to say, immensely impressed by not only her understanding but also by the fact that she is Egyptian herself. We exchanged numbers which eventually led us to dating. When I finally proposed to her it was actually in front of the peach tree I had planted years ago. I got down on one knee but before I got my answer she ran into the house then came out with a ring as well. Turns out, she was actually planning on proposing herself because she was madly in love with me and she just didn't want any other woman to have me. My son, in all his sweet childlike innocence, told his mother what happened because he was present when it happened. My ex literally showed up that night in the rain yelling about how I could propose to my fiancé in front of our tree and that this isn't the end of us. I am completely exhausted at this point. I cannot go no contact because she is the mother of my child but she is basically harassing me and my fiancé. How do I convince her to move on, to get over her fear of men and not force me to get a restraining order?
I refuse to walk down the aisle with my dad. I love him but he's the last person I want near me on my wedding day. When I was 4 years old, my dad found some Jezebel or whatever and cheated on my mom. Sadly, I had to see my father on weekends. I hated going because his little homewrecker wife always tried to act like my mother. I still loved him, though, so I went to his house and tried to stick to his side. She hated that. She would always pinch me and yell at me whenever he wasn't around. Whenever I told him, he'd tell me I was lying for attention. When he got married to that witch, I wasn't even invited to the wedding. His excuse was that I was bitter and would ruin the ceremony with one of my tantrums. When he had my half-brother, he started ignoring me. He stopped picking me up for my weekend visits and just paid the mandatory child support. He basically abandoned me. He would tell me that he wouldn't talk to me unless I act like a good child, also known as call my stepmom mom rather than her name. He would make excuses not to take me to ice cream or do any activities. He once promised me to go to one of my school events and take me fishing after. He ghosted me and told my mom there was an emergency. I was again abandoned. Want to know the emergency? Poor baby brother had a cold. By that time my mom started dating my stepdad, Lenny. Lenny was the father I never had. He was a single dad but he still treated me like his own child. He taught me how to swim, how to drive my car. He attended all the school functions I was in. He was there every time my dad abandoned me. I went very low contact with my dad, only contacting him on Christmas. I don't even call him on Father's Day. I'm getting married now and naturally, I asked Lenny to walk me down the aisle because he's my real dad. My dad was invited as a regular guest. This infuriated my dad. He told me I am his only daughter. I shouldn't keep him away from his rights as a father. I'm getting calls from his side of the family too. My father is upset and I am sidelining him. According to him, he has been a great father and I am being unfair to him. He doesn't want Lenny to walk me down the aisle at all. I told my dad he can walk his stepdaughter on the aisle and he will only be a guest. I have made my decision. He called me a jerk and told me he didn't pay child support just so I could grow up to be an ungrateful brat. So was I wrong? I know he is my dad but I just don't feel like he is.